He's Blake. I'm Ronnie. All the good names are taken podcast. And today we're talking Friday the 13th, part two, 1981. Blake, I got to admit, this is one of my most favorite horror movies of all time. It gets better and better every year. This is one of those movies in the franchise that I consider it's either this one or part four is the best, like pound for pound quality movie in the franchise, and part six is my favorite. But there's a lot of questions about this movie, and a lot of people have problems with this movie. With the first big problem is Jason's here.
Yeah.
So I think it was Tom Savini that said, "Why the hell is Pamela Voorhees killing people if Jason's alive?"
Yeah, it's a great question, Tom.
So he didn't come back for this movie. But after the first one made a ton of money, it was going to be impossible not to make a part two. And this is in one of those rare occurrences where I believe part two is way better than part one. Might be nostalgic, might be the fact that we introduce who's going to be the star of the franchise from this point on, and that's Jason Voorhees.
This has always been my favorite in the franchise, but I did make a turn last week with the original. I love the original, and it was so great seeing the intro to this movie pick up where the original left off, and it reminded me how great that movie is, and now we're going right into this one. And I'll be honest, Ronnie, I watched this one. I tried to watch this one with fresh eyes, and the grade dropped with this rewatch. Just as the grade, went higher with the rewatch of the original, the grade for part two dropped for me on this one. It's still great. I still love it. I think I still have it above the original. But yeah, I got some questions about this before we get into our good and bad and ugly. So this is not Crystal Lake. This is a different campsite that's located on the same lake, right? You and I have had questions about this before, about how big this lake is. I think you and I found a fan-made picture a couple of weeks ago, and we were texting it back and forth with each other, Nick Push, about just how big this lake is and all the different campgrounds surrounding this lake. Paul says, "Hey guys, Camp Crystal Lake is off limits."
Yes.
So this is a completely different camp that they're at. And, Sandra and Shitbag find a sign in the beginning that says Camp Crystal Lake, and Ted says Camp Blood. This was on the same lake that we're going to be.
So apparently where all these counselors are getting trained, Blake, is called Camp Packanack. That's where it all goes down. That's where Jason shows up to take care of all these counselors in training, which answers our question. You got Camp Crystal Lake, that's located on Crystal Lake, Camp Packanack, that's located right next to the property on Crystal Lake, and there's no telling how many more properties like this are around Crystal Lake till you get to the residence where the Jarvises live. And
Higgins Haven,
absolutely right. If you look across, there's a scene where they're all standing when all the counselors are swimming. If you look in the background, you can see houses along the shore on the other side of the lake. So this is a very heavily populated lake. And it seems like, I guess we could go the Vincent DeSanti route whenever he was here and explain to us that Jason is just trying to live out there, and any kind of trespassers he wants to kill immediately. So the cop explains everything's been dormant for 5 years. We haven't any problems in 5 years. Holt, Paul, whatever his damn name is. You're too close. Why don't you just relocate to another county? And then they move in there. They're there 2 days before Jason has killed 8 people. So, yes, Camp Packanack is where it all goes down and starts this reign of terror over the next 3 to 4 to 5 days. That's going to be Friday the 13th, part 2, 3.
Now, you kept calling this a training facility. Do you think at any point in time they're going to get kids there over the next week and a half? Because Paul says, I know you all think that summer counselor is just an easy job, but it's actually hard work, and we're going to have fun today, but tomorrow the real work starts.
See, I think this camp is strictly for these adults. I think this is a situation like when you go to get CPR certified.
Yeah.
I think these guys have to go and get camp counselor certified, because he mentions that these multiple people that he introduces us to are from all over the state. Like me and what's his face, we did some time up north. You two guys, y'all work on upstate. So I think it's just where they go to get their certification so that they can be a camp counselor for the summer. But I mean, if all it takes is for Paul to tell them, don't be on your period and bears are dangerous, I mean, hell, I can get certified really easy. What's going to kill me is when they're doing the running. I definitely couldn't do that.
Yeah. Well, neither could Mark. Do you mind if we switch it up this review and we start with the bad?
Sure, go ahead, because I'm gonna go ahead and tell you I've got a lot of good and I got a lot of discussion topics I want to go to. I don't have many bad, so yeah, let's start with the bad.
I got a lot of good and bad. I think it's gonna be one of our longer reviews, but I'm gonna go the intro with Alice.
Yeah,
as my first bad. I think that it could have been so much more, Ronnie. Alice is on the phone talking to her mom, and is she there to work at the lake? Is she there to stop it from opening back up? There's no explanation. She tells her mom, this is how I have to deal with this. So what exactly is she talking about? I mean, it's been 5 years. Did she just get there, or has she been there this whole time? There's no explanation. Where's she staying? Is she close to the lake, or is she just, inside the town? Jason carrying his mom's head around into town. Why does he take the tea off the stove? This whole intro, I think, could have been explained better. If Alice would have went to Paul and said, please don't do this. Please don't do this. And that's how Jason gets Alice. That's how Jason finds Alice. I think that would have been so much better, Ronnie. I think it would have meant more. And that would explain the sheriff coming back to Paul saying, hey, Alice is missing. Y'all need to pack up and leave now. And I get why she didn't want to be in the movie. I read about the stalker and all that, whatever. If you're going to go in a different direction, I don't think you have to include Alice at all. If you're not going to go with my idea, then let's not have her at all. So that's my first bad.
Yeah, well, there's
what could have been.
The two biggest arguments about this movie is, how did Jason find Alice? Did he go out of state? And, the fate of Paul at the end of the movie. Let's talk about Alice. It's a good point. And I did a lot of research today, believe it or not. And it's not one of those cases where I said I did a lot of research and I just make it up. But apparently, the beginning of this movie takes place 2 months after the events of Friday the 13th, Part 1. And the reason she's on the phone with her mother is she has come back to Crystal Lake, hoping that fixes and helps repair the damage that's been done to her, to come back to that town and just face her fears about what happened at that camp, get her mind healthy, and then go back to California. Okay. That's the thought process behind it. But if you, and before anybody puts it in the comments, I understand that the Friday the 13th Part 2 novelization is not canon. But the novelization explains it like this. She comes back. She's there to repair all the trauma that she went through 2 months earlier. In our last review, you said all of her best friends are dead. And, we didn't even bring up the point that she just met those people. But right. At the same time, she's been surrounded by all these murders. Everybody at that place died, and she survived and had to kill somebody and had the trauma in the lake. But she comes back after 2 months, and she's staying there. The novelization says she visits Camp Crystal Lake to try to face her fears. And while she's there, Jason sees her, and he sees her leave. And he tracks her into town, and he spends weeks looking for where her car is. And finally, he finds her car outside of one of those houses. And every time he goes to town, he takes his mother's head in a sack with him. That's what the novelization says. So we're supposed to believe that at the beginning of this movie, it picks up when Jason has finally found out where she lives. Now, I'm all with you about he's carrying his mother's head around. Why does he put his mother's head in the refrigerator? That makes no sense. How do you know she was going to go to the refrigerator? Killing her off kind of sucks because, it erases all the goodwill from the first one. But it also sets the tone that Jason has taken TCB, like Elvis used to say, taking care of business for his mother. And now he's going back to the camp where he can live. The novelization goes all into Jason was in the woods when his mother got killed. He took the head before the police got there. He's been carrying it around. And seeing his mother get killed is what ignited the hatred for for the people around that camp. Not only did they do evil things to him by letting him drown, but they also killed his mother. Now, anybody that inhabits that area, he wants to kill. I find it kind of hard to believe that we don't know how far it is. If you go by what happened with Annie, it's a pretty good trek into town. So him tracking her into an area of town and then finding where she lives. I know there's theories out there that he could have checked a phone book, but you got to figure she's not in the phone book. She's been back to California and she's back there now. So I think that's the most coherent explanation that I can give that will somehow make the beginning of this movie less stupid, if you will. But I found a little bit of joy in knowing that at least the novelization tried to tie up those loose ends. You still don't buy it though. But I'm just saying. Here's another thing: did he call her on the phone? When she answers the phone, is that him calling her, or did he just cut the line before anybody could say anything? That's another question. But the whole him walking around with her head like Bilal and Dwayne from Basket Case, that's nuts. But it is what it is. He's a mountain man out there getting it done, and she has to die at the beginning of the movie because the stalker was this must be a real up guy. He was fascinated with her and stalked her, and she didn't want to do another movie. So I said, "Hey, let's just kill you at the very beginning of it." It's a loose end, but I was really happy with the research that I found today, the answers today. It makes me feel a little bit better about that movie. I can tell by the look on your face, you still don't buy it. At least it's some sort of answers for us.
I ain't got enough money to buy that shit. What's your first bad, Ronnie?
My first bad is Ted's running style. There's a scene in the movie where they're training and Ted is running. So let me back this up a little bit. Mark is sitting there screaming at all the people with legs. He tells Travolta there, "Hey, all the women are passing you up." And if you don't notice it in the background, Blake, check out the running form on Ted.
Jesus Christ.
Look at this. Look at that. Look at that. So that's the first bad in Friday the 13th Part 2 for me, is the running form of this creep, this dork, this Ted. I can tell right now. One more time, Blake, because I'm going to do a lot of work for this. I slowed it down and everything. Check the shorts out. Look, the length of the shorts I love. He's got it tucked in. He's got the headband. He is working that ass. Look elbows out.
Limp wrist, headband.
I had it. So
I love how he's making fun of Jeff for the women being in front of him. Like you wouldn't be running behind Terry and Sandra and all them. Why would you be out in front?
I know
like White Goodman.
I know a lot of people give Ted a lot of shit, but the character didn't bother me that much.
It didn't bother me on the rewatch either. I was #1 hate club with Ted. It really didn't bother me that much on the rewatch.
No, and what I put in some of my notes was that was a fantastic way. We've been saying fantastic a lot on the show lately, but it was a wonderful way to start this movie, introducing you to these two new characters, is Jeff and Sandra in that truck. Is that their names?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and they come into the town of Crystal Lake, which looks almost exactly the same as it did in Part 1. And then in the background, if you pay attention, the guy loads up their truck and tows it off, and he's just looking straight ahead while that guy's screaming, "This is my truck! This is my truck!" And Ted has played this prank on them where they're running all through Main Street and pulls over. And then it cuts over to Max, the mechanic, who's laughing as he puts the car down. I want to know more about Max. Because you got to figure what Ted works at the garage with him, because he goes, he's crazy too. Or either Ted's just one of is Ted even from Crystal Lake?
Apparently he's been there a lot because all the locals know him.
They take a crap on Ted, but he does have a couple of scenes in this movie where he says some stuff and you see a little bit of range from silly dork to actually being serious. One of those is when they pull up when there's a log in the road, which we can go ahead and talk about that right now, Blake. Did Jason put that log in the road? Because the first thing Jeff asks is, where'd this come from? Dude, there's trees everywhere. And that shit breaks off and falls. Trust me, I know.
I think what he meant by that is nothing was broke, like where they were, and you hear them say when you get the POV shot of the killer in the woods, you hear one of them say, "Who would drag this to the middle of the road?"
So Jason's trying to keep people out of there. Once again, he's trying to put his fence up. Don't come out here. But people have already gotten in there. Are there multiple ways to get into Crystal Lake? Because Paul's already been through there. Or was he trying to keep people from leaving? I don't know. But he gets very serious when they find the Camp Crystal Lake sign over in the ditch. And he's like, no, it's Camp Blood. Put that down. And he's like, well, tell us about it. He goes, no, you don't even want to know. And they get in the car and go. And then later in the movie, when he's in the bar, they're talking nonsense. And he looks at Paul and goes, this is all bull crap. Our kids get pulled in today because 5 years ago, some girl flips out of a boat and freaks out. He makes a lot of good points. Two, I should say a lot, but he makes two good points in this movie. He can be serious. He's Paul's number two. And yeah, he's goofy. He's goofy, but all these movies need a goofy character for a little bit of a break from the tension and the horror. But he wasn't as bad in this viewing as I remembered him being, except for that running style. That running style is crazy.
That's your next the first time I've ever noticed that. That's ridiculous. My next bad is the lack of character development compared to the original.
Yeah.
You know, I listened to you talk about Annie, the opening with Annie, and how she's a cook and she loves children and she's excited to go work at the camp. And you talked about Bill and you talked about Alice and Steve Christie and Marcy, who's having the dreams, right? And Brenda. And I mean, just lots of character development. And I don't feel like we got that in this one, Ronnie, other than Mark. You get Mark's backstory, you get what he wants to be, but everybody else, you don't really get that. Like, I don't care about some of these people dying because I didn't get to know them like I did in the original. So, yeah, lack of character development for me.
I thought Jeff and Sandra were going to be the main characters, the way it is fixated on them at the very beginning. You're like, hey, here's our two main characters, and Ted's going to be the side character that probably gets killed off. But then they flip the script on us, and we're introduced to Paul and Jenny and the rest of the crew. I agree 100%. I think that was one of my bads for Friday the 13th Part 1 is I needed more character development because they were so interesting. In this, they go the route a lot of horror movies would go after this. And, hey, we're going to give you a name. We're going to give you that they're dating. We're going to give you that they're horny. And then we're going to see if they can survive. Okay, guys, here we go.
We're just going to speed rush through everything.
I want to know more about Paul. I would like to know a little bit more about Ted. We do get to know a lot about Jenny. She's in college. She's a smart ass, but she's super smart. She's cool under pressure. She's going to get her PhD in child psychology. So we know a lot about that. And that's as deep in a character we get, like you said, besides Mark, who's in training over and over. I'm in training. Okay, you're in training. So there you go. Go train. But yeah, it serves them up for a smorgasbord here. And I guess it could have been a lot worse if like 15 of them hadn't went and stayed to drink that night. And Jason takes care of these guys so quick. I didn't remember it being that quick, but he kills everybody that stays behind, like literally in like 5 minutes. So,
oh yeah.
All right, my next bad and my last bad is Jason's shack. That whole scene is very interesting to me. Jason runs across the road and the cop chases him. I believe I had that, Blake, for one of my goods. Hold on one second. Yes. So I'll go ahead and tie that in. So Jason runs across the road in one of the creepiest scenes of this movie. And the deputy chases him into the woods. First off, there's no way in hell I'm doing that. They obviously have deputies patrolling that area based off what happened 5 years earlier. So the cops have gotten a lot smarter. They're getting constant reports of people seeing stuff out there to the point where the cops believe it a little bit. So they patrol the area to make sure nobody's walking around. That deputy tries to keep Jeff and Sandra off that property to keep them safe, not to be an asshole. So he sees something run across the road. The first time I had a DVD and could pause that and see it in a clear picture, a guy with a bag over his head hopping across the road. That's so awesome. And I still have so many questions about that. Is Jason doing that to lure this guy into the woods so that he can kill him because he knows he's patrolling the area? Or did the cop just catch him as he was running across the road? He's running across the road like Mose from The Office. So he chases him to the shack, and this shack's in the middle of the woods, obviously. But they give us a little clue. He steps in that mud puddle as he's running to his house. And later on, when Jenny's running, she steps in the mud puddle. And if you paid attention, you know, oh crap, she's close to Jason's house. So back to my bad. We get into this shack, and it doesn't seem like it's that far off from the road, and it's in an open area, very easy to find. Was it a shack that was already out there left by hillbillies and he just took it over? Did he build it? The main reason I have a bad on this is it has a toilet in it. We talk about it all the time, Blake. The toilet had water in it, and there's no way that thing has a septic system for him to go in there and take a and flush the toilet. You want realism in this movie. He needs to walk in there and there's just overflowing from this toilet because Jason's squatting down to use it. That's where I'm reaching for a bad. I don't want to do the same bad everybody else does. What happened to Paul? How did Alice get killed? I want to know why the hell Jason took his time to put a toilet in his shack, because that stuff goes nowhere except onto the ground. It'd been more realistic if he had a 5-gallon bucket in there. You could in the bucket, go outside and dump it in the woods. So
Yeah,
that's my
dump it out the window.
That's my second and last bad for this movie.
Okay. My next bad, Ronnie, is killing Ralph.
Yeah.
Obviously, I like Ralph. I like the character. And why not, Ronnie, just leave him as a red herring throughout this whole movie again? Why not? Why not? You know? He shows up at the campsite. He's being a peeping Tom. He's watching Jenny and Paul make out.
Pervert.
And he gets strangled. You're watching it, and it doesn't mean anything. So that's why I kind of wish it didn't happen. But if you left that with just him standing outside watching, and we never see him again, except maybe he rides up on the bicycle at the end when Jenny's being loaded into the ambulance, I think that would have been better. It would have been open, but I wish they wouldn't have killed Ralph.
I think this is because he was such a memorable character from the first one. Right off the bat, he's got to be there to give the doomed line to Jeff and Chandra while they're on the is it Sandra or Sandra? So Sandra. He's got to be there at the very beginning of it to give the "You're doomed" line to Jeff and Sandra while they're
told the others.
Yeah. What other?
Part 1.
From 5 years ago. You told the people from 5 years ago.
And plus, if they don't kill Ralph, 5 years later, he gets to take the cruise to New York.
Here's the deal.
Instead of his brother.
How different would this movie had been if at the end of this movie, you find out Ralph's doing the killing and he was Mrs. Voorhees' husband? And I mean, it's a completely different deal. I mean, this movie's great. I wouldn't change anything about it. But he was on the premises in part 1 and rode off. And then Mrs. Voorhees shows up in her Jeep. The cops already said that Ralph's wife was looking for him. So she rode out there, killed everybody, and then he's there to kill everybody that in revenge for killing his wife in part 1. And then the Jason's just the red herring. All explains how Alice gets killed at the beginning of it. Ralph does it. You know, he's in the town anyway. It'd be a different route they could have went. Now you got Jason's daddy and Jason's mama killed, and then Jason can start in part 3.
Yeah, Crazy Ralph is married to Crazy Pam.
There you go. But like I said, I wouldn't change anything in this movie for the world.
My last bad is
Hold on. I got one thing. The one question I have about Ralph's death, and I'll jump in there with you, is he's strangled with a piece of barbed wire. And if you watch the scene, Jason comes both hands over and grabs him by the neck. It's not like a wraparound. So is Jason in the top of the tree and drops down around him? Because that'd be the only way that could happen.
Yeah.
Before he strangles him. I'm like you, though. It was a needless death. You bring Ralph back to be a pervert for just a second. He gets the "You're doomed" line in, and then we're going to kill him off and move forward, which don't make a lot of sense when all the guys in the van almost run over Ralph wannabe in part 3, but we'll talk about that later.
I have one more bad, and it's not that big of a deal, but there's this weird chase scene between Jenny and Jason, and it shows them running in the woods, and the scene like loses audio, and all you hear is the music, and it shows Jenny running from the waist up, and then it cuts to Jason running, chasing her with the pitchfork or whatever he's got, and it was just weird. Why on the rewatch for me? Like, why show that? Is it supposed to be how long they're running in the
Yeah.
woods? Is it
Yes.
supposed to be like a distance thing and they're tired, or and that he's just nonstop running? I think it's scary if you don't show Jason. She's running, running, running. He's constantly there.
I think
But
earlier in the movie, the clip we showed earlier, she's leading the way on the long distance running. So I think they showed that Jenny was leading the pack with all the counselors running. So at the end of the movie, you can understand why she was able to outrun Jason for the
drunk.
for the long distance, and it just takes him a while to get to the camp because she just ran off and left him.
I think 95% of the scenes that show Jason are really cool, spooky, and intense, but that one wasn't needed for me.
Okay, Blake, what's your first good?
My first good is the cop's cardio. No. His cardio is good though.
Look, when he hit that tree, do you think that was planned? Because he's like, oh, and then he keeps running. There's no way they planned for him to run into that tree. I think he ran into that tree by accident, and he's such a pro that he kept going because he knew he screwed up and he didn't want to mess up the shot.
My first good is opening with characters who aren't the main characters again. Did it with Annie in the original. You do it with Jeff and Sandra in this one. Another great shot of the town. You mentioned all this earlier, and I was just smiling because I knew it was my first good. Another great classic shot of this town, and Ralph is back immediately. The scenery. Never noticed in the beginning. Paul rings a bell to like summon all the counselors who showed up, and you get a shot of a few of them running up the steps that
Yes.
Mark is eventually going to be, chair's going to roll down. I never noticed that before this rewatch, and I thought that was really cool.
I'm the worst movie watcher. I never knew those steps go down to the boat dock.
Yeah.
He went down those steps into the water.
Mm-hmm.
My first good, Blake, is, and you're absolutely right. I don't know if I said it earlier, if I'm repeating myself. I love the way this movie looks. I
Yeah.
love the way it's shot. It's sun shining all throughout the movie until it's just about to get real, and then it starts raining to bring in the terror. But
And
this
honestly, Ronnie, I have a theory that I think that that's why this movie is a favorite among a lot of the Friday 13th fans is because of this, the scenery, the lake and the camp and the woods. Everything looks beautiful.
and they did it better than they did in part one. Like it's the point of view is a little bit creepier because you see Jason's hand. You see the hand of the person. You just had the camera shot in part one, and this one you see somebody pushing the branches down to look at what's going on because he's watching them from the side of the road. He's watching them while they run. He's watching Jenny while she puts up the chainsaw.
So real quick, while you mute yourself coughing, my next good is POV killer shots. Spying on Jenny, spying on the counselor, showing his hands. That's literally the next thing I got wrote down.
Yeah, I mean, it's awesome. My first good is the very beginning of the movie. I already talked about the prank with Ted and Max to open the movie. I thought was a fun way to open the movie. Jeff and Sandra running after their truck, and you're introduced to the goofball for the movie. I thought it was, like I said, fun, a very fun way to open up the movie, and that's my first good, Blake. My second good, since you've already given yours, is the campfire scene. I think the campfire scene where Paul, I love that you're laughing. The campfire scene, we're all going to have the same ones. It's okay. The campfire scene where Paul does the famous speech about Jason and Crystal Lake should have been played before every single sequel after this movie because it is legendary. That is one of the greatest scenes in horror movie history. It is quite possibly the greatest scene in Friday the 13th history. I say that because I honestly think later on in the movie, Jason coming up out of the bed is an even better scene than them sitting around the fire. But I love this scene. I love the crackling of the fire. I love the expression of all the characters as they sit around the fire and they're getting more and more nervous as Paul gets deeper into this story about how the townsfolk say he survives on wild animals and vegetation and he's protecting the area and how he's out there and he's been dormant for 5 years and he's thirsty for young blood. And boom, Ted jumps out of the bushes, dressed like an animal with a spear and scares everyone. And Paul's just like, all right, that's the end of that. That's not true. We got it out of the way. Guys, go to bed. I just think it's a great scene, Blake. And I know it's probably wore out on every Friday the 13th Part 2 review that's on YouTube, all millions of them. But you can't do a review without talking about just how amazing that scene is. That scene is Friday the 13th.
I agree with you, and that leads me to my last good. It's cool, intense shots in the movie. And you mentioned the campfire scene, classic. You mentioned Jason running across the road in front of the cop car. I love it, love it, love it. You mentioned Jason popping out from under the covers or under the sheets to reveal his bag head. I'm going to mention one that doesn't get mentioned a whole lot, Ronnie, that I noticed during this rewatch that I think is equally creepy. Jenny's on the run. She makes it to her car, and Jason runs up to the window of her car. And I guess I just completely forgot about that scene. That is really creepy. Now, he does the scream where he drops down.
Yeah.
And you're like, where is he? And then, like, you remember, wait a minute, you're in a punch bug, so you should literally be able to, I mean, and then, like, somehow he's on top of this soft top car stabbing down. And I'm like, oh, okay. But that was a really cool scene, him running up to that glass window like that. It was so scary. And then you got Jason being seen in the background running toward his shack while Jenny is in the shack looking at everything. If you look through the window, you see Jason running through the woods, and it's such a good scene.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my final good, Ronnie, is all the cool scenes from Friday the 13th Part 2.
My next good is Paul. Paul is a really good leading man in this movie. You assume he's going to live, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. I like him. I mean, he's the boss of this camp, and at the same time, he's got a little rebel in him. You find that out when the cop, like, Paul's a total dick to the cop. The cop comes up and he's just like, just keep him off that land. Y'all are too close. You need to move to the next county. And he's just sort of looking down at the paper, not paying attention to him. And he's like, next time I'm going to run them in. Maybe I'll get a warrant on this place. And he's like, oh, really, really? So I have no idea why he's being such a dick to the cops, because they just got there and the cops are just trying to keep them safe. It's not a situation where the cops aren't believing everything people are saying. They're like openly saying, you guys are in the danger zone, like Top Gun. So Paul was a really good character. He's also one of the first guys that squares up with Jason. Like the scene where Jenny goes, there's somebody in this room. There's somebody in this effing room. And then you see him pop up because Paul's just not paying attention to her because he's like, she's just being paranoid. He should have been paying attention to her because they just found blood upstairs. He wrestles around and gets, assumingly, we figure he gets dead because we don't see him again until he runs up to the shack and he's wrestling around with Jason some more. But I like that character. It's one of the, until we get to Tommy Jarvis in Part 6, it's one of the few characters that squared up with Jason and, depending on who you believe, died or lived.
Oh, he was about to die. Paul was about to die. Jason was coming up to stab him when Jenny took care of him. But talking about the fight inside the shack, Paul did a lot of structural damage to Jason's shack. I don't know what Jason's going to do the next couple of days. He's probably going to have to live in a barn.
The next one's Jenny. Okay? Everybody's in love with Jenny from Part 2. And I've got an argument in a couple of reviews of somebody who might actually be better than Jenny. But Jenny is smart, blonde, wears a bikini in the movie, doesn't do all the stupid stuff that normal females do. The closest thing she does to that is she pisses herself under the bed when a rat comes by. She's able to keep her cool and outsmart Jason in most cases, especially at the end when she used her child psychology training against him. Very good character, worthy adversary of Jason, and I would have very much liked to have seen where they were going to go with the Jenny character if she had decided to come back from Part 3, because Part 3 was going to be sort of like Jason goes to the hospital to try to get her. And that also might have been where we got to see what happened to Paul and Ted, if they're still alive, if they get taken care of in Part 3. That never happened, though, because she didn't come back. But everybody loves Jenny. My last one, Blake, my last good, the kills. They're simple and they're great. You know, in the first one, everybody talks about Tom Savini, the axe to the face, the throat slit on Annie, the Kevin Bacon arrow through the neck, the Mrs. Voorhees head chop, Bill being bow and arrow to the top of the door, Steve Christie getting stabbed in the all of that stuff. But in this one, they're simple, not gory, and effective. Ralph getting strangled with barbed wire. That hurts. Okay, that's the worst way to get strangled. Then you got Jeff and Sandra. Spear right through the back and the chest, killing both of them. Sandra, by the way, was like 13 in this movie, and they had a full sex scene they had to cut out. Mark, maybe the best kill in the movie, machete to the face. And it's just like, it's not, they didn't even trick us, Blake. It's just like he's sitting there looking around, waiting. It's not like he turned around and got hit with a machete. Whatever was there, it's like Jason ran up from out of nowhere and hit him in the face with a machete and sends him down the way. You got the chick. Jason comes out of the bed, and the first time we see what Jason looks like with the sack head, the town that dreaded sundown sack over his head and the one eye, he cuts her leg immediately, and you see that open up, and he just walks at her with his little bruised thumbnail as he gets closer and closer before he kills her. And then at the end of it, Jason takes a machete about 15 inches down in the shoulder blade, almost to the chest area. The kills are simple and effective, and I really, really liked them. I'm not one that's a gore lover. This was just enough for me, Blake, and that was my last good.
I'm gonna throw in the cop getting a hammer to the back of the head.
I forgot about that. That shades of Halloween too with the security guard. I mean, it makes the same noise too, like ding. I mean, that might be the most brutal death, to get claw hammered in the back of the head. All of these deaths are crazy. I got one before we get to our ugly. So Ted jumps out of the bushes with that little costume and mask on. How different is this movie if Jason picks up that mask on the stairwell and wears that mask to kill everybody? That's a creepy looking mask. And it also foreshadows it early in the movie by having somebody wear it. So don't get me wrong, the bag on the head's legendary. It's great. It's iconic. But just the part of me from the Choose Your Own Adventure novels I read as a kid, what if he had to pick this mask up, and that's the mask he would have killed people for the rest of the movie, or chased around Jenny for the rest of the movie in the woods wearing that?
Do you think Ted went home with that bartender?
Absolutely.
Or did he die in a car accident on the way back to the camp?
No, they didn't. Well, look, let's get to it before we get to the ugly part of this. People argue this, like I said, the second biggest argument besides the beginning is what happened to Paul? Is Paul dead? Is Paul alive? So the end of this movie, we get Muffin back. Oh, hi, Muffin. What are you doing out in this mess? Muffin opens the door and comes in. And then all of a sudden, Jason jumps through the window onto Paul. That's our obligatory scare at the end of the movie. Carrie has now marked the franchise where we'll have a jump scare at the end of every movie.
Jump on the Paul or Jenny?
Might be Jenny. He pulls Jenny out. Is that what it is? Yes, Jenny.
Yeah,
you're right.
Paul is picking up Muffin when Jason comes through the back window and grabs Jenny.
Is Paul dead? Now, the research I did today, they say in part 3 at the very beginning of it, and we'll review part 3 soon, the newscaster says they found 8 bodies. So how many people died in this movie, Blake? We're not counting Alice, because that was 5 years ago.
We're not counting Alice.
We're not going to count Alice at first, because Alice died 5 years ago. Because in the novelization, it talks about why he took the tea off of the stove. It's because he loaded up Alice's body and took it back to Crystal Lake to his shack with him. So Alice's body is sitting there decomposing along with Mrs. Voorhees' head. Let's count the bodies, Blake. So we've got
Ralph.
We've got the cop. We've got Jeff and Sandra. That makes 4. We've got Scott and Terry. That makes 6. We've got wheelchair guy. We've got the one that did the perfume on her cooter. That's 8. Paul would make 9 if Paul was dead. But apparently in the news interview in part 3 at the very beginning of it, 8 bodies were found. Now we can go to the Crystal Lake Memories, or whatever that documentary is called, where the writer says Paul died in the original script. Supposedly at the end of it, she's asking, "Where's Paul? Where's Paul?" You get the zoom in on Mrs. Voorhees' dead head, and she smiles at the very end of it. And they thought it was too supernatural for a severed head to smile, but the smile was supposed to tell everybody that Paul was dead. I don't understand how that tells people Paul was dead, because there's a lot of evidence that points to Paul being alive. Okay, first off, how did they find Jason's shack? How did they know anything went wrong? Ronnie, we have all the people, all the counselors coming back from drinking. They got there and seen everything was amiss, and they went and got the cops because they said the phone lines wasn't working. Still, somebody had to be there to lead them out to Jason's shack, because Jenny was in no frame of mind to have done that. So you can argue that Paul was alive. You can argue that Paul was dead. But if the writer says that the original intent was for Paul to be dead, I guess we got to assume, he's dead. But I understand the arguments on both sides. So you can hit me in the comments with, is Paul alive or is Paul dead? Blake, I'm going to let you go first. Who is the ugliest person in this movie?
It's Alice in the intro. I think she's, I think she's very ugly. And the lack of storyline didn't help her. I thought we was going to get a shower scene, but she ruined it. She pulled the curtain open and she's staring at me. I don't like that.
Don't look at me.
Don't look at me. And she's still got the ugly haircut from the original. And
it's only been 2 months.
It's only been 2 months.
It's only been 2 months.
I never knew that, Ronnie. I just assumed this was 5 years later.
No,
that's why I had all those questions.
If you listen to Paul when he tells the story, he talks about her going missing 2 months later. The police never found her body. There was just blood everywhere in the house. So,
but see, okay, so thanks to our boy Maverick over at Maverick Media, he shared deleted scenes from this movie where she gets is ice pick through the side of her face and it comes out her nose. We don't see that. Yeah, we don't see that in this version, but she actually turns and looks at the camera and you see that it comes out of her nose and the cat starts licking her face or something like that. Well, in another deleted scene, you see a decapitated head, or maybe it's not decapitated. Maybe you just see Alice in the Jason shack at the end with the ice pick through a skull. And you're like, wow, that's Alice's body. So a fun little fact that you guys can YouTube yourself. It's out there. Maverick showed me. I mean, it's a really cool. I kind of wish they would have left that in, but I think they had to take it out because of the MPAA or whatever.
Yeah, that's my ugly too, Blake. I thought about flirting around and going with Ralph, and I paused it all through those bar scenes. And there were a couple that I probably could have went with in those bar scenes, but I couldn't get a clear enough shot of their face. And trust me, if you're out at the bar, you're not ugly anyway. You can drink enough that you're always pretty. So I'm going with Alice too. Definitely ugly. Plain Jane. She puts the ugly in Plain Jane. I'm glad she's dead. She was a great character. I wish she was back, but I'm glad she's dead. And she's definitely the ugliest person in this movie.
I almost went the easy route. I almost went with Ted. And I almost went with the bartender who's interested in Ted. But I think Alice is it.
Or the old man that, Ted asked about, is there any after hours joints around here?
Oh, yeah.
Go back, guys. Look at the old man's reaction after Ted turns around. He does a face, too. Ted's making fun of him, and he's like rolling his eyes at this dork asking me all this stuff. This is a great horror movie. When I think about the Friday the 13th movies, a lot of the scenes are from this movie. It doesn't get much better than Paul telling the story around the campfire. The shots of the lake are beautiful. The actual cabin where they're staying, that big rec area with the huge front porch where they're eating. It's gorgeous. It's gorgeous. It's gorgeous. It's a great movie. If you've never seen Friday the 13th Part 2, what the hell is wrong with you? Go watch it. Are you through talking about this movie yet? Can we wrap this up, Blake?
Everybody comment down below. What are your good parts of this movie? What are your bad parts of this movie? And who is the ugliest person in this movie to you? And do you agree with Ronnie's good and bad? Do you agree with my good and bad? Comment down below. I love reading the comments. I want to read them all.
All right, we got Friday the 13th Part 3 coming up soon as me and Blake get into the canoe at Camp Packanack and we paddle our ass all the way around Crystal Lake for every one of you guys.
Yep, we're heading to Higgins Haven.